Hello, thank you for joining this webinar, Yesterday's Mines, Tomorrow's Minerals, Revitalizing Legacy Mining Assets for the 21st Century. This webinar will provide insights on the connection between national security and legacy assets, market dynamics for these minerals, U.S. cleanup and recovery efforts, and global potential of full value mining. I'm Abigail Hunter, the Executive Director for SAFE Center for Critical Minerals Strategy. Our work here promotes building secure, sustainable, ethical, U.S. and allied critical mineral supply chains to ensure the energy, economic, and national security as the world transitions from a fossil fuel-based economy to a minerals-based one. I am joined today by a star-studded group of experts. When my team started planning this webinar a few months ago, we couldn't have dreamt up a better group of people to take what is an extremely technical topic and turn it into seriously a glitzy one. We have with us today General Cody, retired U.S. Army general who served as the 31st Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army. General Cody has been a longstanding member of SAFE's Energy Security Leadership Council and is joining us today as his debut as the co-chair for the SAFE Minerals Center. So thank you, General Cody. We also have Dr. Steve Felkus, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Lands and Minerals Management at the U.S. Department of Interior. Steve previously spent 7 years on the Hill working on these issues, experience that I hope will translate some of this discussion into legislative action. Kate Somerville, General Manager of Legacy Assets, BHP, which is one of the largest mining companies in the world with a legacy asset footprint in the United States. Dr. Elizabeth Hawley, Associate Professor, Colorado School of Mines, which is a top academic institution for mining and metallurgical engineering, thanks to thought leadership like Elizabeth's. And finally, Luis Anderson, Global Director of Copper for Hatch, a leading engineering service company with a lovely tagline that they are entrepreneurs with a technical soul. Luis's near 2 decades in minerals and mining definitely qualifies him as such. Now that I've got you all excited about experts on the panel to come, I want to turn first to General Cody for some opening remarks to remind us why accessing these resources is critical to our national security. After that, we'll turn to Kate, who will provide some scene-setting remarks. And then we will have a moderated discussion with some audience Q&A, so start thinking up some great questions. Please, General Cody, to you.
Okay, thanks, Abigail. And up front, the disclaimer, I'm not an expert on minerals or the periodic tables. I spent my career in the military, running the Army during the global war on terrorism for 6 years, while we started growing back our military. And then I spent 10 years in the defense industrial base. And I learned very, very quickly that we've moved from being a nation of dependence on OPEC's fluctuating barrel cost, Russia, Iran, and China's influence on fossil fuels, to a country that is now becoming way too dependent upon rare earths and minerals. And so I'm going to give you a quick national security perspective and why I think this is an inflection point in the history of the United States as a industrial power, as a geopolitical power, and as a military power in this world that, quite frankly, I think is very, very dangerous. Quite frankly, I think our industrial base, and we all ought to be concerned that we actually call our industrial base through the Northeast as the Rust Belt, because our factories have failed and we've offshored everything. That has a great impact on our allies who depend upon us like they did in World War II. We were the arsenal of freedom. You're seeing it again today in Ukraine and Israel, as well as some other places. But we have great limitations. A couple things. First, the U.S., I took a look at the Geological Survey. The U.S. is over 50% reliant on imports for 41 of the critical minerals that we need for commercial use as well as military use. And we're 100% reliant for 17 critical minerals. China controls almost this supply chain, and they are our greatest threat going forward as a democracy as well as our allies. We have vast untapped resources in the U.S. We always have, whether it's fossil fuels or minerals. We got over 500,000 mines that we're not using. And just like in the tanker wars, when oil was a big problem for us and we weren't producing much, fight for materials to keep an economy going, as well as a deterrent, building a very technological military, we're on the backside and we're way behind China. So why do I say it's a national security issue? One, we need to re-energize our industrial base. We need to get young people working back in factories. We need to stop offshoring it. And that's going to drive us to get our own minerals so that we're less dependent upon China in particular. And when you take a look at our jet engines for our fighter aircraft, they're very reliant on nickel and cobalt. Our night vision goggles, our lasers, our radars, our FLIR are all dependent upon things like germanium crystals and other things that give us a technological edge, but also gives us the ability to bolster up our allies. A side note, the F-35, our frontline fifth generation fighter, takes a half a ton of rare earth minerals just for one fighter. We import 100% of titanium, not just for golf clubs, but titanium we use in our turbine engine shafts, in our submarines, in our helicopter rotor blades, in our armor. So when you take a look at that going forward, if we allow China to control this global supply chain on these critical minerals, we are going to be in dire straits. World War II in the Pacific was initiated because Japan needed natural resources, oil, copper, tin, and other things. I'm afraid if we don't start producing and become a deterrent and become less dependent upon China, we could find ourselves in conflicts that just like we did with the oil crisis. So that's kind of, my take on it. I firmly believe we're at an inflection point as a country. I know our panel of experts are going to talk to us about what it's going to take to revitalize our mines in the U.S. and our processes to repurpose a lot of these minerals. It's going to be costly, but I will tell you this as a military leader, war is twice as costly in terms of what it does to our economy, but certainly in the bloodshed of our great men and women who wear the uniform. So that's why I volunteered to be the co-chair along with Abigail. And I really look forward to being educated by all of you as we take a look at this problem and then try to influence Congress to loosen up on some of these regulations and permitting and everything else so that we can really understand this threat to our national security. So over to you, Abigail.
Thank you, General Cody, for the very sobering and scene-setting context for this conversation and the real national security imperative behind all of this. Now I want to turn to Kate, who is overseeing teams both on-site and at the corporate office in Arizona for BHP with a mission of reconciling the region's mining legacy assets. And Kate, thank you so much for also showing up in full garb. This is the closest that we'll get to a site visit for a conversation like this. I want to turn it to you for some important priming of the discussion to come.
Thanks, Abigail. If we could just bring up the slides, please. Great. So I just wanted to, the purpose of these few slides is just to share some real life experience of some closed sites and the value that they can bring, and a couple of real examples of what we're doing and some of the challenges we have. So next 2 slides forward, please, Jason. So just wanted to, bit of scene setting. The team that I look after has around 200 employees and contractors, have 23 sites, over 10 locations in various stages of closure and close closure across Canada and the US. And they're really, they were, for BHP, we inherited those when we did takeovers through mergers and acquisitions. And they used to mine copper, zinc, uranium, tin, and gold, and especially the copper and uranium supported previous war efforts as well. But what we're trying to do now is to progress these sites towards some closure outcomes. So that could be relinquishment, divestment, repurposing, or ongoing management. The things that we do on a day-to-day basis, like we have a lot of tailings dams, and some of them were deposited in the 1920s, and tailings dams have risks associated with them. So a lot of our money now is making sure they're going to be safe for doing mitigation work around that. We're also making sure we understand everything about that as well. And so we'll be doing also remediation that might be on stability, that might be looking at the waters and the soils. We'll do general care and maintenance. So we have like water treatment plants, those kind of things. And also we have a lot of community interaction. So stakeholder engagement and those kind of things. So the reality of those, it's very difficult to relinquish these back to the government. The uranium is possible, but a lot of the others aren't. So we're really looking after these things for a very long time as well. And a couple of the things we've done when we were doing our tailings buttresses, we have very close engagement with our tribes and protection of our heritage sites and look at what we're going to do with any artifacts that we come across. We've also closed around 300 mine openings. So we've identified a lot of those and we've closed them. We've also identified some off our properties as well. And that's where things like Good Samaritan laws would come in handy, because we can go and do some community service, but that would limit our liability for doing that as well. The key message here I just wanted to share before I jump into the topic is that there are a lot of abandoned mines as well in the USA, but just wanted to share that there's actually a lot of companies out there who are doing the right thing with the legacies that they actually do have as well. In terms of the topics today, the value closed mines and abandoned mines can bring, the kind of three things, and I'll touch on two of those in the next few slides. So remining. So technology has advanced and companies can look at reopening, expanding or reprocessing tailings and waste materials at some of these sites as well. So remining is one. The next one is products. So there's waste products, and that could be crushed. They're things that are already crushed. The carbon emissions have already spent a long time ago, and there's also water. So you can get a lot of rare earths and other kind of things, and also out of these waste products. So it's just not always the tailings. There can be other products as well, and then also land can be available for carbon offsets and other decarbonisation initiatives. So I just wanted to touch on two of those that are relevant for today's discussion, and they are remining and the products from tailings and water. So Jason, if you can go back a slide, please. Thanks. So this is just a picture of something in Arizona that we do have, and you can see we're actually doing some drilling there as well. And we actually have some very young people on our crews, and it's great to see young people entering the mining industry and getting excited about that as well. But this particular operation was discovered in the 1890s and mined seriously from 1950s to 1982, so quite a while ago. And we have a lot of challenges on this site for, it closed in low copper price. And so the copper price is better now. And as we're approaching our closure, we have a large liability there, and there's still copper in the ground that we could get out. But we have challenges of, is there enough land to remine? Do we have any processing pathways? If we want to do it, what are the permits going to look like? We have federal waterways and BLM land around. Do we have good relationships with our stakeholders? And also, I've got to compete for capital with really fantastic projects in our mining company. So the capital that I will ask is going to be way less competitive than, say, maybe a new mine. But what I can do is I could remine this, make some money out of it, and really make a really good closure, like a really great site that we can repurpose in the future. So we could sell it, but the problem with selling it as well is you have to sell it to a credible buyer. If someone's going to come in and make a mess, and it just will come back to us, and then we've got to add another zero onto our closure and how we're going to fix it up for the future as well. So in this particular example, we have other mining companies around, so it's possible that we have processing pathways close to us that we can use, but it is really going to be a challenge. But it would be fantastic if we could get some support to realise that. Otherwise, we're likely just to close this and then and maybe sterilise, not be able to get that copper in the future as well. So it's really increased partnerships and federal agencies will be great to be able to bring this to market sooner than later. So that's just one example there as well. The next one, please, Jason. So the next one is about products. So as I was saying, you've got crushed materials on site, and they're partially processed or crushed. And we want to make sure what we want to make sure is that whatever we do on site, the product is clean for any other use, or we can extract materials out of this area as well. So we're quite excited. We're going to be doing a pilot in the coming year, and we're going to be looking at cleaning tailings and water. And it's going to be a 3-month trial, and we're looking forward to do that and see what we can get out of our tailings. We also have tailings around our area that we own, and the grade of those tailings is what companies in the area are putting through their plants right now. So it will just be obvious to say, hey, we can get the copper out. However, we've got to we do the numbers, and the transport costs are quite expensive for us to get it over there. So again, that might sit there and we might not realize the value out of those tailings. So some of the challenges around reprocessing that are transport costs, and also ready pathways to actually process that. So that's just a little bit of a starter to get us thinking. So I'll pass that back to you, Abigail.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's extremely helpful to see what these things look like in actual practice, as well as be rooted in the opportunities they present, in addition to many of the challenges that you went through. Now I want to open it up to our illustrious panel. After hearing from Kate of what this looks like on the ground, it would be really wonderful to hear how all of you are approaching this topic, including from your very, very different vantage points where you're sitting in Washington, Santiago, and Golden. So first, let me turn it to Steve to give us this government and regulatory perspective.
Thanks very much, Abigail, and thank you to SAFE for inviting me to be on this panel and for holding this webinar about an extremely important topic. Now, the Biden-Harris administration strongly supports using mine waste as a way to help address some of our critical mineral supply challenges. And it's just one piece of a lot of different strategies that we're advancing across the administration with a lot of different departments and offices involved. And it's also not just a potential supply for critical minerals. This is also a great way to address as General Cody alluded to, we have 500,000 abandoned hard rock mines in this country, and we don't have a funding stream to clean those up. We do deal with coal. We have a coal abandoned mine land program, and that is very nicely funded thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, and we're doing some tremendous work across the country on that. But on hard rock mines, we don't have that. So if there's a way to incentivize companies to go out there and clean up some of these sites with the promise of also being able to extract some critical minerals, so help offset the cost of cleaning that up, and then also provide more supply for the U.S. It's just a tremendous win-win that we're very much in favor of moving forward. So at the Department of the Interior, we're focusing on really 4 questions, overall questions about this issue. First, where is it? What is it? How do we get it? And are we allowed to get it? Now, for a couple of these questions, especially where is it, basically where is the mine waste and what is in the mine waste, most of that is being led by the U.S. Geological Survey through their mine waste inventory and characterization programs. So this is a continuation of their U.S. MIN program that had started a number of years back in the previous decade. And this is a compilation of all the different mine features that they can find in the U.S. And there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions. There are a tremendous amount of these. If you see a map where they've plotted in yellow, overlaying in the US, all the different mine features, it basically is just a yellow outline of the United States. Everywhere throughout the country has some sort of abandoned mine features. Obviously, not all of those are going to have mine waste. And we're using funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law through USGS's Earth MRI, or the Mapping Resources Initiative program, to try and identify and inventory more of these sites. So we're not just looking at a topographic map and seeing there used to be a mine here, but we're actually looking what's left behind. Is there some mine waste that might be reprocessed? Are there tailings? Is there a safety hazard that needs to be addressed? Any number of things. And USGS is doing this in partnership with the state geological surveys now. So they are funding, I think it's 15, 16 different states right now, with grants for both inventorying and characterization. So the inventorying work started a little earlier, providing grants to states to go out and identify what is at these sites, but then we're also working on characterization. So providing for assessments and sampling protocols and trainings to allow states to find out, okay, what is in this waste? Is there anything valuable? Is there anything that has been missed because it wasn't economic at the time or wasn't known that it would be valuable later on? So, that is something that's advancing. There's constantly new awards that are going out to the Geological Survey. So this is a critical partnership between the states and the USGS in trying to develop this inventory and identification. Then if we get to how do we get it, this is also something that U.S. Geological Survey is very heavily involved in. They're doing a lot of research on reprocessing different types of mine waste. How can you best access whatever critical minerals or other valuable minerals that might be in there? But we're also doing this through other parts of the department as well. For example, the Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation, and Enforcement is doing work along with the Department of the Interior on acid mine drainage and coal mine wastes, and trying to figure out how can we extract potential critical minerals from those. And one of the really promising and successful efforts here has been in West Virginia, where there's now 2 water treatment plants that are treating acid mine drainage coming out of abandoned coal mines that normally would be heading straight into rivers and streams and fish, killing fish and creating all sorts of problems. And now these water treatment plants are not just, removing the acidity from that water and making it, healthy to release into streams. They're also extracting critical minerals from that waste stream. And this is occurring right now. So there's still efforts that need to be done in terms of like refining this product and, moving on and creating a much more robust supply chain downstream. But it just goes to show that you can extract critical minerals from acidic mine waste, and then that will help, the goal is anyway, to help to then offset some of the cost of doing that treatment. So that's something that DOE is putting a lot of funding into. The Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation, Enforcement is also very much engaged. And then the final question, if we know where it is, what's in the mine waste, and what technologies we need to actually extract those minerals, are we allowed to get it? And this gets to the legal and regulatory issues. And this tends to be much more complicated than people think, because there are a lot of issues around access and regulatory issues and licensing and land ownership that are not as straightforward as a lot of people would hope. And this is something that we identified in the Interagency Working Group on Mining Laws, Regulations, and Permitting. When we put out our report last year, we recommended that the government do an in-depth study of what are those legal barriers to reprocessing mine waste. And right now we have a group called the Federal Mining Dialogue, which is made up of experts from a variety of different federal agencies working together and looking at this question very much in depth. What are the issues, whether it's Clean Water Act or Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act or other state issues? What is holding up the possibility of going out there? Good Samaritan legislation is mentioned a lot in this vein. I think that's what most people might be familiar with, but that's just one of the potential issues that might need to be addressed if we're going to, let companies go out there and actually do some work on the ground at these sites. And so that's a little intro to what we're doing at the Department of the Interior, and I look forward to answering any questions from the audience as we go on.
Thanks so much, Steve. I want to turn to Elizabeth. You primed her really well, but talking about all the research angles that USGS is gathering. And so, Elizabeth, it would be great to hear from you from an academic institution of what you're doing with all this data, from the US, but also globally.
Thanks, Abigail. So as a researcher, we're working on reprocessing tailings and other types of mine waste, including mine impacted waters. And I think from my perspective, I want to give you what I think is the spectrum of opportunity that mine waste presents. So the thing that's right in front of us that's probably most implementable is reprocessing tailings and other mine wastes at a few select legacy sites. That would obviously require Good Samaritan policy, and it demonstrates that this can be done. At the other end of the spectrum, sort of the pie in the sky that I think we should aspire to, is reprocessing and remediating all of those abandoned mine sites in the US, all of the legacy sites that are still owned by companies that are active. And in addition, trying to remove all of the deleterious elements so that we're left with something that can be safely used as construction material. And then implementing those same processes at active mines so that we're not producing any waste at all. So that's what I would call zero waste mining. And I think that we're a long way off from there. In the middle is the kind of example that we heard of from Kate, where opportunities are still really achievable with the right policies and with the right research and development funding. And this is going to look like reprocessing of mine waste at a decent number of abandoned sites and larger sites in the closure portfolios of active companies. And I think this is where we have the potential to actually move the needle in terms of critical mineral supply for the US, particularly for those small market strategic commodities that are typically recovered as byproducts like germanium or indium, where we don't need very much, and any that we could produce domestically would really make a difference. So that's one of the areas where my team is focusing. But I think one of the things that we've done to help us understand where the US is on this is review all of the US Securities and Exchange Commission filings since 2001 by mining companies that are required to file with the SEC. So these are companies that are not just operating in the US, but are operating worldwide. And I can tell you from our review that large-scale implementation of tailings reprocessing to recover valuable constituents has only been conducted at less than 30 sites. So that is not a lot. We have a long way to go. We also survey qualified persons who are authorized to sign off on mineral development documents. And less than a quarter of these QPs have had any sort of involvement with evaluating reprocessing mine wastes, and only 2 that we surveyed had actually signed off on such a document. So this gives us sort of a workforce development gap. It tells you that there's a lot of research that needs to be done. And I think from my perspective as a geoscientist, I'll tell you that reprocessing mine waste is really hard because the material is very heterogeneous. So you take the initial geological heterogeneity of an ore deposit, and then you layer on the fact that processing methods and economic cutoff grades changed over time. And then you probably let this material sit there for a long time. So it experienced differential weathering and biological activity. And this is not a charcuterie board where you can go in and pick out the olives. This is probably more like a quinoa salad or a smoothie. So how do we actually get in there and get the stuff that we want? Going in blind is expensive too. How do we know what's there? And Steve alluded to the work that the USGS is doing. And I think that what we understand sort of from a resource estimation perspective is that the same rules don't apply when you evaluate an ore body that is produced by geological processes. You're not going to be able to use those same evaluation tools to assess how much resource is in what is basically a man-made pile of geological material. So we're working on all of those things and figuring out how to assess them, and also figuring out the technology that we need to be able to recover the stuff that we want, and ideally be left with only something very benign that could be repurposed for bricks or wallboard or something like that. But I think that really broad uptake of mine waste reprocessing is going to require deeply interdisciplinary research efforts. And this is the last gap that I want to talk to you about. We reviewed about 100 recent scholarly pieces of work, scientific studies on mine waste reprocessing to recover valuable constituents like critical minerals. And we found that almost all of those studies are written and conducted from the perspective of only one research discipline. And I think that reprocessing any kind of mine waste is going to take the geoscience, is going to take mining and metallurgical and geotechnical engineering. It's going to take environmental engineering, economics, social science, policy, and all of those disciplines have to come together. And right now there isn't a funding mechanism for that kind of work. We have a project that is funded by the National Science Foundation, and I think we're really the only deeply interdisciplinary team that's working on this. And we need a lot more people to be putting their heads together and bringing tools from all kinds of disciplines, because it's a really complex problem. So I'll leave it there. Thanks for the opportunity to share those thoughts.
Very, very insightful, Elizabeth, and definitely sounds like we need to do more on the R&D front to really figure out this problem, wrap our arms around it, and truly get at solving it. You also alluded to a lot of the technical challenges affiliated with reprocessing the mine waste. And so I think it's a really great segue for Luis, who can talk through the different types of mine waste and what they necessitate in terms of a technical response. So Luis, I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Abigail, and thanks for having me. As you alluded, I'm logging in from Santiago, major producer, Chile being a major producer of copper, one of the critical minerals for the decarbonization of society. I guess our approach within Hatch as an engineering firm and projects firm, it's helping clients such as BHP, I guess, kind of bridge the gap between, what some of the things have been alluded, right? What's in the ground, what's in the deposit, what mineralogy and what technologies can be applied to recover in the case of, say, copper as an example, right? It's important is the mineralogy, right? So understanding what's there and how heterogeneous the deposit is, we can apply different technologies. Kate alluded to some of these tailing deposits from the 1920s. The technology back then was not that great for recovery. So, the amount of copper, say, there, it's as good as some of the mines, the new mines. So, there's a lot of potential there, not only from securing the supply of critical minerals that was discussed before, but as simply value, right? At the end of the day, we want value out of these legacy assets. And again, looking at it from the project's point of view, the importance here is to maximize recovery with new technologies that can then have enough margins to then pay for the capital investment that's required. So I think that's one aspect that's really important here. Trying to how do we all, research, policy, and the private sector to kind of maximize value. There's a lot of precedents, and it can be done. Again, here in Chile, a very big industry, different players, BHP being one of the top producers in this country, is pushing for that. Let's not talk about legacy mines, but even their current mines, trying to maximize the copper output from residues, from low-grade ores, from low-grade piles, and advancement of different leaching technologies, which maybe we'll talk about after. It's going to be able to recover copper from the low grades that were produced in the past that are now considered attractive for society.
Super helpful. I want to bring Kate back into our conversation after her opening remarks. Kate, you talked about one of the challenges in terms of developing these assets being some of the permitting issues. And here at SAFE, we're always pushing for early and often community engagement as part of permitting reform. Just curious, you've also talked about the importance of community engagement throughout these projects. So wanted to give you the opportunity to add in there.
Yeah, so a lot of, well, a couple of things. The communities that I go to where we have our legacy assets often, have had the mining and they've had their glory days, and they're not so economically viable anymore. And so a lot of those communities would welcome some mining and see that's positive. Like if they see drill rigs around, they're asking us, "Are you starting again? Are you starting again?" But you do have mixed community sentiment when it comes to mining and what you're doing, and often when we take people on our tours and we show them what we're doing, and especially some of our tribes, we take them to our San Manuel mine in Arizona, and they just can't believe the great job we've done on closure. So changing the narrative around, we do look after these things. We are trying to protect the environment and the communities. It really changes the value on and the support that you do have for those kind of things. So the stakeholder is very important of those things. But as I said, some of the challenges are these are small. They're not going to compete for capital in my company. But, if there's a company that really wants to, can see the value that this would bring to a community of restarting and getting some value out, but also using that value to make right the environment in the community and help fund that cleanup. It's really, really valuable for that. But as I said, some of the challenges are, look, you need a processing pathway, or you need the capital to put the processing into to get that as well. And then also you have those permitting times. If you've got brownfields, it might be quicker to get those approvals through. We think maybe 5 to 8 years rather than 20 years for a new mine. But it when you're trying to do these things and it's not really economic, but you're trying to do the right thing. Any help that we can get to make it more attractive to sell, to get that support will be good for us.
So I want to kind of combine some audience questions that we received in the registration, but then pulling on some threads from both Louise's comments and yours, Kate, on, you know, how common is it that we're reprocessing these mine tailings or mine waste? Do we need a paradigm shift in terms of how we're calling it mine waste into something maybe a little bit more palatable or sexier to help with that community angle, to make sure that you have that support, especially in the situations where it's uneconomic and you're trying to do the right thing, as you said, Kate, and welcome many to jump in here, but potentially Louise, you could speak to this, or Elizabeth, really any of you are apt to kind of weigh in, so go for it.
Maybe I'll start quickly, right? So yes, maybe it's selling it as look, we're squeezing. Kate alluded to, right? Like the greenhouse gases were already emitted. You know, there was already an impact in the environment years ago. Now is a chance to squeeze more minerals out of the same material in an environmentally way, right? I mean, making sure that the environment is not impacted further, or that impact is minimized. This can provide benefit not only for communities in terms of jobs, but again, value as a whole, right? Value for the owner to be able to sell that copper in this case, and value for society because we'll need more copper for decarbonization and climate change.
I'd like to weigh in on this, Abigail. I think what I've learned from some of the social scientists on our team is that the community perceptions of mine waste reprocessing haven't been studied in detail. There's really an assumption that communities would perceive this as beneficial, but in some cases it might change a closure plan or perhaps open a door to other new brownfields operations that the community might not be interested in. And I think I would prefer to frame this not as selling it to communities, but rather hearing from communities what their values and priorities are and where they would place mine waste reprocessing within that sphere. And I would love it if I could wave a magic wand. There would be some sort of fund that communities could apply to say, we've got mine waste in our backyard, it's a problem, here's how we'd like it handled, we're going to apply for grant funding to be able to do sort of a community-driven project.
Anybody else want to add to Elizabeth and Louise's perspectives here? So I want to turn back to you, Steve. You know, you alluded to in your opening about kind of the regulatory backdrop here and how this isn't maybe as easy as it sounds. And I was speaking to a company yesterday who is trying to do more full value mining for their projects in the United States, but are running up against challenges in just the retitling of their waste piles for the and so wanted to give you an opportunity to speak more to these complexities, add to what you already alluded to, should you have anything to provide in terms of insight.
Sure. Well, while I'm still waiting for the Federal Mining Dialogue to come back with their report, and that will have a very nice layout of, well, hopefully a comprehensive list of all the different rules or regulations that might slow some of this down. I alluded to Good Samaritan. And that reflects the potential liability that any reprocessor would pick up if they came in right now and started trying to work at a site, whether it has a tailing pile there or it's been a previously closed site. Going in there under the Clean Water Act assigns you certain liabilities. And we have a lot of third parties, environmental NGOs, for example, that are very interested in doing this work and have done this work in some limited cases elsewhere. They're just unable to accept that liability. Same thing with some mining companies that might want to come in and clean up some sites as part of another mining proposal. They are unwilling to accept that liability. So there are some bills moving through Congress. One has passed the Senate. The administration strongly supports a Good Samaritan proposal. We are not, to my knowledge, weighing in specifically on the details of this legislation, but certainly we think that some sort of protection for truly Good Samaritans that want to clean this up and clean this up the right way is warranted and could really help unlock a lot of work in this area. But there are also things that people don't think about a lot of times, and some of them can be under, I mentioned the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act. And here we've got potential access issues, or you might have a former mine site that's officially closed. So no one actually, still has responsibility for it. The bonds have been released, but there might still be some mine waste, might just be a pile of mine waste that's stable. So how do you provide access to that? If there's a revenue stream coming from that, who gets that revenue? Are royalties shared? So there's a lot of these little questions that can come up when you're, looking at individual sites, and certainly something that we hope that, what the Federal Mining Dialogue is doing will highlight a lot of these other issues in addition to the Good Samaritan protections, so we can then come up with potential fixes for those.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. And just SAFE has been a long time supporter of Good Sam as well, so hoping to see progress there. I want to turn back to you, Luis. Steve kind of alluded to different motives and benefits affiliated with doing this. And I know when we spoke before, you talked about how those varying motives, the reserve type, the technology, can have a really big impact on what you're getting out of these waste materials. And so wanted to hear from you on some of these trade-offs and how we in the United States or even globally vary in terms of balancing those.
Yeah, I guess so in terms of trade-offs, starts again with what's in the ground. So the mineralogy might allow the reprocessing as a reflotation, at which point you're going to end up with a concentrate, and then you have to ship it to a smelter to produce then the anode and then cathode. Smelters are more prevalent in Asia. So that was discussed earlier about the securing the actual copper in this case. Now, there's a new, advancements in leaching technology might create another trade-off, which is actually leaching copper into a solution, putting it through a solvent extraction and electrowinning, and without getting very technical, at that point, you can produce a cathode, which is now pure copper. And if you can keep that within country, so you could take advantage of, again, a legacy asset that you can actually produce cathode from it. So again, it's novel technology that's been advanced from a pilot to demo, and we want to take it to commercial. But I think that's where the going beyond the traditional shutting down a mine and leaving it there to reviving that mine and applying new technology to actually produce cathode that can then go into electronics, cable piping, and then solve this security issue that was mentioned earlier. All combining the the economics of a project, right? So you need to have good returns, protecting the environment, and community support.
Yeah, it really is a complicated backdrop. And for those in the audience listening who have started to wrap their heads around supply chain challenges related to batteries, we're talking about cathodes for like the metal here, not necessarily the plus side, the cathode active material in a battery that we're starting to really develop supply chains for in the United States. That was something I learned early on in this position too, in differentiating language. I want to go back maybe a little bit more to the community question. We received an audience question, and just for a reminder for anybody listening to continue submitting questions to the Q&A that we can incorporate into the discussion. There was a question about free, prior, and informed consent given to Indigenous people related to these original mining projects and injustices affiliated with not following FPIC. So wanted to hear if there's examples of mining sites that have carried out and obtained FPIC for remining processes, what that looks like, and how the community engagement works in that regard. So maybe Elizabeth or Kate on this. Go right ahead.
Hi, yes. So FPIC is fairly new. We're getting used to that, but probably the example that I'd use is we have a tailings dam that we needed to get consultation on for our buttress. Now, it was private land, so we could have gone and done it without talking to our Indigenous tribes, but we chose to go and do that as well. And then we worked out with them. So we had 7 different tribes. We had 2 days with each of the tribes. We walked the ground. We had done our surveys, and then we had to work out which tribe they all had different ideas around how they wanted to do various different things. Eventually, they all they came to an agreement of who had the choice around that to retrieve the artifacts, and then we went to the place where they stored them. They had a museum, and we sort of saw where they went in the end when we had those artifacts. Now, we didn't have to do that, but it was really good that we did that, because then you're starting to build that goodwill with those tribes, and we let them walk the ground. They could, as I said, we took them to our Seminole mine where we actually closed something, and they got some really good views. Their interest in that was really, they want to see things. They think mining has been a harm on the planet, on the earth, and they can see that our interests were the same as theirs. We want to make things good. We want to clean up things and make things as right as we can. So we have had experience in that, but the key is that it takes time. It takes a long time, and you have to build those relationships and those trusts up front. And it's also in that, co-creation, something that Elizabeth was talking about. You have to talk to them and work out what they want, what their interests are, and then work out what that middle ground is, and then work together for the solutions. And you can't rush that, and you've got to build those relationships at the start. You've got to keep them going, and you've got to be talking about it all the time.
For sure. One of our partners at the Mineral Center taught me in sharing kind of insights similar to this topic, that community engagement and social acceptability is not a static thing. It's not done at the front and one-time beginning of a project. It is very much dynamic, ongoing, and so very important to your point, Kate. Does anyone else want to jump in on that? Or now I'm getting lots of audience questions, so happy to pivot.
I think I'd like to add a little bit there. One of the things that I was alluding to with the lack of social science research around community perceptions is this sort of assumption that communities and tribal nations weren't necessarily consulted the first time. And so coming in with what may be an environmentally beneficial reprocessing operation still can look like lack of consultation. And I would really advocate that communities and tribal nations be in the driver's seat here. So I think that's something that we can aspire to and try to take forward.
Great. So we have a question about best practices in this space, and certainly, as General Cody alluded to in his opening, with some of the atrophying of doing this type of work in the United States, it's great to look to countries who have been very much, engaged in not only the upstream but midstream beneficiation of these materials for best practices and insights. So the question looks to, are there countries maybe within existing multilateral bodies like the Mineral Security Partnership, or in Latin America, for example, maybe calling on Luis's expertise, that are doing things really well, where we can learn from their insights to address these issues?
Again, maybe I'll start. So yes, I think there's I think in countries such as Chile, the concentration of copper companies and technology is very high. However, it's applying technology from vendors from Australia, from the US, from Europe, right? So I think nowadays with it's a global economy, global market. Yes, using benchmark from the operations in here can be applied in the US with. But again, it goes back to characterizing the ore body or the deposit, and then applying. Each place might be different. You might have some impurities based on the geology of, say, the Southwest. That might be a bit different in Chile or Peru. But yeah, there's a lot that can be learned. And the good thing is that companies such as BHP are global. So even within companies, getting that benchmark and lessons learned that can be applied to do it better every time.
Great, thank you. We have two questions for Steve. One is quick and one is long. So the first question, Steve, when you were talking about all the information that the USGS is collecting, people are curious if that will be publicly available, and if so, where stakeholders can access that. So that's the quick one. And then the longer one is, what is the BLM classification for the type of land an abandoned mine site is on? Is it a mining claim? Does BLM withdraw the land for the mineral estate if it discovers the abandoned mine site? So I'll turn it to you to take whatever time you want to answer both of those things.
Thanks. Well, the short one about USGS data is yes, that is all publicly available. If you go to the USGS website, their USMIN site is sort of their central point for all of their mine location data, and then that can feed into various other sites that they have about their different research work and also what they've collected so far. This is a requirement of the grants that they have to the state geological surveys is that all the data that's collected is also made public. So that will all be out there available. For BLM, it's a much more complicated question. I could make it a very short answer saying it depends, because there is no single classification for what kind of land mine waste might be on. It might have a claim on it. It might not. It might be withdrawn for certain reasons, if there's like a health or safety situation, or if it's a Superfund site. But there really is no single designation for land that has mine waste on it. And in a lot of cases, we don't even really know where it all is. BLM still needs to do its own inventories in a lot of places to determine where all these mine sites, whether it's a safety hazard or an environmental hazard or an additional tailings pile left over, the data is not complete. So BLM still has to go out there and in most parts, I imagine, just be unclaimed, unreserved public lands. But again, could be anything.
Thanks. I think we have time for one more audience question. So, it's been mentioned a few times that we have 500,000 abandoned mine sites in the United States. And one of the questions we received from one of the registrants was, how many of these are economically viable, right? It's kind of a similar issue that we hear a lot in the mineral space. Everybody is somewhat auditing what they have in their mine waste and their abandoned mines or legacy assets, and it can kind of be information overload. But really, what should we be prioritizing here to kind of maximize the impact that we can have?
Well, if I can start with that, I would say that we expect the percentage that would be economic to extract minerals out of would probably be very low. Certainly, we don't imagine there's 500,000 additional new mines just waiting out there to be addressed. I mean, part of this is exactly what the U.S. Geological Survey is trying to get at, is to improve that inventory and do that characterization so we know, is there anything here? And if so, how could you extract the additional minerals? But even if it's not economic, a lot of these sites just need to be addressed. Either they are open pits or open shafts that might be safety hazards for communities, or they're creating water pollution or land pollution. There's a need to address these sites even beyond the potential source of critical minerals there. We see the critical minerals from these sites as a potential bonus, one way to offset the cost of addressing these sites. We don't expect that it would necessarily be very economic to just reopen some of these old abandoned mine sites by themselves without some other need.
Great. So I want to ask one closing question as we run up against the clock here. Oh, Kate, sorry, you can jump in really quickly.
Yes, just jumping in really quickly. So we've actually done the numbers on, what's cost is hundreds of $1 millions to close mine. And then we look at, could we extract value to offset that and kind of get kind of a break-even number? And it kind of does, like you can, we can say we could just spend all this money on closure, or we could mine a little bit if we've got a processing pathway, especially leaching and, and pathways around us. We could, it could like break even and we've got some value out of it and we've actually closed it in a better way. So we are kind of doing, but it's just still so hard for me to get that capital to do that. And as I said, on the tailings reprocessing, you think, oh, well, it's already ready to go through a plan, but the transport costs are kind of going, it's just worth leaving in the ground. So it's so marginal, just speaking to also what's just been said. So we've actually done some numbers on both of those aspects.
And I think what Kate just described is such an important point, because we tend to think about these issues in the segments that they exist within the supply chain, and also, the committees that have jurisdiction on them in our congressional context. But, we need the processing to justify, some of this remining. We need to have transportation infrastructure to justify the movement of materials. And so as General Cody opened and talked about kind of the need for a resurrected industrial base here, all of these pieces justify each other and build on each other. So the more that we can have the ability to reprocess in the midstream here, the more these assets become viable. So with that quick diatribe, I do want to ask one final question, a classic DC question of if you guys could wave a magic wand, and we've heard of many of the challenges today, you know, the low pricing for copper to actually justify, you know, some of this remining or returning to these legacy assets, regulatory challenges, technical challenges, R&D challenges. So if you had to pick one thing, try to keep it quick, what would that be that you could solve and really try to unlock the mineral potential here in legacy and abandoned mine sites? Maybe I'll go to Elizabeth first because she's first on my screen.
Sounds good. I think when we're looking at what is in mine waste, the copper, for example, might only be 1% or maybe a few percent if we're being aspirational. The other things that we're interested in from a critical minerals perspective are just a handful of parts per million, maybe a few hundred parts per million. And so to me, the real goal is looking at the rest of the material. If we can find the technical solutions to make the rest of the material usable, that unlocks a huge number of these sites that then we could go back into. And I think ultimately that's going to take R&D support, and potentially there's going to need to be other kinds of incentives to go back into some of these sites.
Great. Steve?
Sure. Well, I'll just highlight one of the recommendations from a mining report. First of all, we get 65 things in there that we would love to wave a magic wand and make happen. But one that I will highlight is the need for some dedicated funding in order to address abandoned hard rock mines, because we have that on coal, we don't have that on hard rock, and that's funding that could really open up a lot of the assessments of the, you know, what's in the mine waste. You know, would it be economic for someone to come in and determine it? Without that funding, you know, we're doing what we can with money from the bipartisan infrastructure law, but we always need more. There's a lot of work out there that we need to do.
Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button. Kate, why don't you go next?
Well, I'd love some dedicated funding because it would really help me sell the idea to my company to really sweeten the pot. And just speaking to Elizabeth's things, you know how much beach sand gets shipped around the world. You know, just imagine if you could clean tailings and have an amazing amount of beach sand, what an amazing business that could be for some communities. Thanks.
And last but not least, Luis.
So, you know, I see it more of the sequence of things. So if I could wave a magic wand and have all the pieces of a puzzle ready to be placed, right? So understanding what's in the ground, having the research advance, the technology, the studies, and then the permitting, right? So it's more of, you know, projects take many years, if not decades, a decade. So it's just having everything in aligned so that from an 8-year project delivery, maybe shorten down to 5 or 4, right? So I think that's the challenge. How do you put it all together so you get the first copper produced from a tailings deposit?
Great. Thank you all so much for such an informative conversation. You know, we heard about the national security imperative behind this early on, but through the discussion, I think it's important to be grounded in that, but realize the complexities of what it really means to access these types of materials. Elizabeth's example with the quinoa bowl, I think, is the best one here in terms of underscoring that it is not easy to just pick out these very vital materials and minerals from a waste pile, but really a lot more of technical research and other kind of community aspects need to be heavily weighted in our solutions. And for all of the congressional staff out here, and this is who we kind of build doing these webinars for, I think we got a lot of really great ideas of where we can go on this. Lots of takeaways in the last answer here on money. So dedicated funding, whether it be for R&D to support kind of the holistic analysis, the challenges, opportunities in this space, community engagement, bringing together all of these different stakeholder groups, Good Samaritan legislation, permitting reform, as well as dedicated funding for kind of going from the coal assets to the hard rock, as Dr. Felgus pointed to. So really a lot to do, and you now kind of know several of the experts to ask follow-up questions to. We really thank you for your participation, and a big thank you to all of the participants on this webinar today for their insights. Have a great rest of your day.